Well, a little bit earlier in the episode today, we talked about the fact that now the Odyssey has become the fastest film of the year
Mm-hmm.
to hit 700 million, blisteringly fast, like completely destroying the $3 billion films that we've had this year in Mario, Michael, and Toy Story. In some cases, getting to 700 million twice as fast as one of those other $1 billion films. And the success of it is incredible. And yet, we live in a world where the crying and the tears, and of course, the
Yep.
conspiracy theories about the Odyssey abound. And they're rather infuriating, but they are there because,
Yeah.
when people like a movie that I don't like, I say, hey man, I'm glad everybody loves it. Wasn't for me.
Mhm.
It didn't work for me. This is why it didn't work for me, but hey, I'm glad everybody else liked it. Instead of taking that approach, a lot of people who have agendas, let's just be clear here, have clear
Yeah.
agendas, create conspiracy theories. When the facts don't align with your narrative, say the facts are corrupt. Where have we seen that before? Anyway, when the facts don't align with your narrative, make up something to suggest that the facts themselves are corrupt. Now, earlier today, an absolutely fabulous guy, Dan Merle, on his channel put
I want
out.
to see that video.
It's fantastic. It's really fantastic. But he put out an editorial today touching on a lot of the things I've talked about on my channel, but he wove together in one cohesive editorial piece that is just beautifully done. I actually wrote to Dan this morning, say, dude, this
nice.
editorial views are so beautifully laid out. Again, he raises many of the points I've raised before, but it's just the way he laid it all out it's succinct, it's bulletproof. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonder. And I highly encourage everybody to go and take a look at the editorial that Dan did today on debunking the Odyssey conspiracy theories. But I wanted to go over some of the ones that he talked about today and
Nice.
and talk about some of the points he raised, the points I've raised about it historically on the channel. And, we'll go from there. And by the way, I'm not going to touch on every point that Dan talked about in his. I'm just going to refer to 5 of the points that he's made that I think are the most relevant here.
Nice.
So let's take a look here, shall we? Debunking the Odyssey hate conspiracies. The first one we're going to talk about here is fake audience scores, right? The conspiracy theory is the Odyssey audience scores, which is, of course, through the roof. The Odyssey audience scores are through the roof. So since that doesn't fit your narrative, that you say that the Odyssey is awful and nobody likes it, therefore, this one came in, and this is one of the first things that Dan talked about on his channel, was this thing. You've all seen this, right? I've had people on my own channel write in this bullshit. But their thing is, this Reddit post that made its rounds amongst everybody who doesn't have enough brain cells to actually look into it themselves. But here it was. Rotten Tomatoes says the Odyssey has a 97% audience score. The raw data proves it's actually 56. You're a moron if you believe that. This isn't about whether you like the movie or... By the way, let me throw this out here. Nothing about what Dan says in his editorial or what I have ever said, it takes away from the fact that you may have in good faith just gone and watched the Odyssey and not liked it. Nothing wrong with that. It's movies. They're all subjective. Just because a bunch of people like it doesn't mean you will or I will. There is nothing wrong with you if you just simply didn't like the Odyssey. Nothing wrong with that at all. Let me be extremely clear about that. But if you believe nonsense like this, you're either A, stupid, or you're B, disingenuous. Because as Dan, and I said this, I addressed this on my show on a Q&A part of the show when somebody asked about it, and I pointed out, guys, they came to that number by eliminating all the verified votes. And Dan does a great job on his editorial pointing that out as well. He just took more time to do it. When you go through what the process was to get to the real audience score, here's what they basically did. They took all the votes and they took out the verified votes. What that means is their process of coming up to their number was to take everybody who actually saw the movie and throw out their votes.
Jeez.
And what they were left with when you throw out all the votes of the people who verified saw the movie, and you're only left with votes from people that you have no idea if they saw the movie or not, you're left with a 56%. Brilliant. Wow. That is so smart. Take all the people that we know saw the movie and throw their votes out. That's a genius. It is so stupid. And again, the premise of it, it's so obvious that if you believe this or say you believe it, you are either an actual legitimate certified moron or you're purely disingenuous. Because obviously the way you come to the real audience score is not by throwing out the votes of the people that you know for certain actually saw the movie. That is ridiculous. It's complete idiocy. And I'm glad that Dan started with that one, as I've talked about on the show myself before. The second one that Dan goes into, and again, I'm not going into all the points that Dan brought up in his editorial, which once again, I encourage everybody to go and check out, is that we've all heard this one. The studio is buying all the tickets. All right. So at first, they tried to say that the box office numbers were lies. When that didn't hold up, they switched their theory to, okay, well, maybe the box office numbers aren't lies, but it's the studios buying the tickets is their big thing. And of course, that is propelled by fake bullshit, like pictures like this, right? Mm-hmm. Does this look, this is a guy who posts, I'm in the Odyssey screening that said was sold out, and yet here I am and nobody's here. First of all, you notice all the lights in the theater are on? You notice that? Like, this is a middle of the afternoon. This isn't about before a screening. Anyway, as Dan accurately points out in his editorial, this was the same game plan that the haters of Captain Marvel used back when Captain Marvel came out. Do you remember this? Captain Marvel came out and all the chuds were like, oh, no one's going to see it. And when it was making $1 billion, said, oh, the studio faked it. They bought their tickets. And then a picture, much like this one, came out that all the Captain Marvel haters circulated of a guy saying, hey, I came to my Captain Marvel screening that said it was almost full and nobody's here. Well, Dan pointed out and did a piece on this back in the day when it happened and said, yeah, I did some research. The guy who posted that picture is this guy, and he named the guy. He said for the past 6 months, this guy has been posting about how Captain Marvel is going to be nothing but a woke piece of trash. Nobody should go see it, blah, blah. And yet we are to believe that that guy went to opening night of Captain Marvel. And again, no proof at all that he was actually in a Captain Marvel screening. So that got debunked. But here they are. They're so desperate that they're falling back to the old playbook. Now, as a part of this, Dan went one step further because Dan brings receipts.
Yes.
Dan, like my show, has a lot of people who work in movie theaters watch his channel, much like we do. And so Dan literally heard from 40 different employees of movie theaters from across multiple states and multiple countries. And he simply asked them this: positively or negatively, have you seen in your theaters any discrepancy between the number of tickets your system say is sold and how many people actually showed up? To which all of them replied, no, there have been no discrepancies, positively or negatively, between what our system says sold tickets and the actual number of people who showed up. This is just anecdotal, Chris. But again, I was at a screening of Spider-Man last night. It was only playing in one theater because it was the special Amazon fan screening. But that fucking IMAX screen that was across the hall for the Odyssey was packed. It was absolutely packed. Again,
on Wednesday.
On a Wednesday, again, this is just a pathetic, let's go back to this old thing we tried with Captain Marvel that was already debunked, and let's try it again. And by the way, Dan also noted that the writing on the screen was Croatian. So he checked the movie theater that was. And guess what? That theater's freaking sold out. And so, again, he went back, double-checked the facts, heard from the actual people that work in movie theaters, and like, no, either positively or negatively, there's no discrepancy between the number of tickets being sold. All right, here's another one. Now, I have not addressed this one. This is one that Dan brought up that I have not addressed before, and I thought this was a really good one.
Okay.
Because you've been seeing this one floating around a little bit, saying the Rotten Tomatoes audience score is completely different than every other audience score. Therefore, it's wrong. As a matter of fact, one of the things that they point out is that how can the Rotten Tomatoes audience score be 97%, yet Letterboxd is only 4.4? Huh? Well, brain surgeon, says Dan, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that Letterboxd is out of 5.
Yeah.
It got 4.4 out of 5. As a matter of fact, Dan brings this up. He said, look, if you want to actually convert them to the same metric, Rotten Tomatoes 97%, when you round it down from its point value, is a 9.6 out of 10. IMDb is 8.5, which is only 1.1 off of what Rotten Tomatoes is. Letterboxd, when you convert it from being out of 5 to being out of 10, ends up being an 8.8, which is only 0.8 off of what the Rotten Tomatoes one is. The one outlier was the Metacritic audience score. But as Dan pointed out, because it is out of 10, as Dan pointed out in the Metacritic audience score, number one, they're not verified votes. You have no idea knowing if any of the people who went over there to register a vote on Metacritic, remember, we're talking about audience scores, not the critics, if they even saw the movie or not. And then Dan pointed this out. If you want to look at the number of people who went on and registered a positive vote, that was either 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, 30% of them, Dan says, it was their first time ever casting a vote. That's suspicious.
Yeah.
But 50% more people who registered a 0 or 1 out of 10 were also their first time ever going to Metacritic to register a vote. So one was 30% for people going to register a 9 or a 10. That was their first time registering a vote. But the people who went there to register a 0 or a 1, and it was their first time going to register a vote, was 45%. So again, 50% higher than the ones who registered a 9 or 10. So you have to take the Metacritic one with it. But even the other ones like Letterboxd and IMDb, which are also not verified, are incredibly close to the Rotten Tomatoes score, with one single outlier being Metacritic, which again had a whole bunch of people that had never voted on Metacritic before, but went over there to vote on it to give it a 0 or 1. So that's another thing that Dan pointed out. I thought that was a really interesting one that he brought up there. All right. Here's another one that I've never addressed, but that Dan brought up, but I see it around all the time. Whole bunch of people saying the Odyssey is an insult to Greek people. It's an insult to Greece and Greek people hate it. It's offensive to the Greeks. Okay. All right. Let's follow that, shall we? Dan decided to go to the Greek version of Rotten Tomatoes. Greece doesn't have their own Rotten Tomatoes, but they have this thing called PEC, which is basically Greek in Greece film critics. And he went there and said, what do the Greek film critics, Chris, these people are supposed to be offended by the Odyssey. What did these Greek film critics have to say? Well, this is what Dan found. Dan found that out of the 26 reviews on PEC, all film critics in Greece, 19 of the reviews out of the 26 were positive, 4 were mixed, and only 3 were negative. This is the Greek film critics. The people who are supposed to be totally put off and offended. by it. And then Dan went on to read a bunch of their reviews saying, and one of the reasons that the Greek reviewers loved it so much is because how true it was to the meaning and the message of the Homeric text. How well it communicated the actual morals of the story and the meaning of the Odyssey, how faithfully the Greek film critics said it actually translated it to a modern age and a modern audience. Then you think, well, that's just the film critics. Well, here's the thing, Dan also pointed out. The Prime Minister of Greece actually called Christopher Nolan. Says this, the Prime Minister thanked Christopher Nolan for the film's contribution to strengthening international interest in ancient Greek civilization, adding that such production bridges Greece's rich cultural heritage with contemporary creative art. Now, none of that is to say that there are not people of Greek heritage who maybe didn't take issue with the Odyssey. Obviously there are, 100%, and I don't besmirch any of them. But the narrative that's been artificially generating, purporting that all of Greek civilization and culture hates this movie and are offended by it, no, they didn't. Not on a large scale, they didn't. As a matter of fact, the clear majority of them do. And by the way, Chris, Dan then pointed out, well, what about regular Greece people? More people went to go see the Odyssey in its first 4 days than any film in 20 years in Greece.
Yeah, I saw. I was looking at an article. It broke records.
I love something Dan said. He said, man, for a bunch of people being offended, they sure are paying a lot of money to go and be offended. So again, are there some people out there who of Greek heritage who didn't like it? Absolutely, 100%. Is the narrative that on whole, the Greek people are offended by this movie? No, it's absolute bullcrap. Absolute bullcrap. But here's a big one that I have addressed before. And I'm glad Dan did as well. Dan just did a better job of addressing it than I did. And that is Christopher Nolan only cast Elliot Page and Lupita Nyong'o just so he could meet the Oscar eligibility diversity rules in order to be eligible to win an Oscar. You've seen it, guys. You've seen this narrative spread around. You've seen everybody. It's been in my own comment section. You've seen it wherever you've gone. Yeah, Chris Nolan only put Black Lady in there so he could meet the Oscar eligibility rules so he could win an Oscar. That's the only reason he did it. That's it. That's the only reason he did it. Which again, you're an idiot. Congratulations. You're completely illiterate moron. You're just an illiterate moron. And I say illiterate because clearly you can't read. Because if you could read, that means you would have gone and looked at the eligibility requirements before saying something so stupid. You wouldn't be so dumb as to talk about the eligibility requirements if you've never read them, right? Like you wouldn't be that dumb. So I can only assume then you can't read. So you're just relying on what other chuds are telling you. Here's the reality of that. And I've talked about this so many times. The diversity eligibility rules, this is the fact, are so laughably weak. I've said this 100 times over the years, are so laughably weak that you would literally have to try to not meet the eligibility rules and you would still probably fail. If you tried your hardest to not meet the eligibility rules, 50% of the time you'd probably still meet them. As a matter of fact, Clayton Davis of Variety wrote, here's the thing. If you apply the test, take all 98 winners of Best Picture and ask which one's standards would have knocked it off the ballot. Which one of the 98 Best Film winners would not have been eligible to win under the current eligibility rules? The answer, says Clayton Davis, 0. 0. If you read the eligibility rules, and I've gone over these many times, you don't have to have a single minority in your movie at all. Not one. You could have a Filipino woman who's head of a department at the distribution company. Congratulations, you've met one of the eligibility rules. You don't have to have a single minority in your movie, not one, to be eligible to win the Oscar. So just don't talk and slam the eligibility rules when you haven't had the common sense to even read or understand them, you moron. It's infuriating when I see
Oh,
that.
yes.
It's just like talking about these rules that you have no understanding of how they work because they're so laughably easy that you wouldn't be able to fail to meet the requirements even if you tried. Go read them. Go read them and see just how ridiculous the rules, which begs the question, Chris, why these rules even exist. Because they don't need anybody to do anything to meet them. But anyway, there's that. So again, Dan went into more on his brilliant editorial, but just for the 5 that I think are most relevant here, the fake scores completely debunked. The studio is buying the tickets completely debunked. RT scores versus other audience scores, they actually line up when you don't have them being out of 5, except for one outlier. The Odyssey is an insult to Greek people. Well, maybe to a couple, but the majority of them clearly it isn't. And they only cast certain people for Oscar eligibility. Complete nonsense and completely debunked. Because Chris, Christopher Nolan's last film, what was it called again? Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer?
Yeah, how many leads were minorities in that film?
I don't
Or
think
how many people were even in the secondary roles that were minorities in that film? Oh, none. And guess what? It won Best Picture. This isn't rocket science, guys. It's not rocket. Anyway, Chris, you've seen all the arguments. You've heard all the arguments. What do you make of the breakdown here that Dan gave us?
Yeah, so I saw Dan's video popped up, and I remember thinking, okay, I got to sit down and watch that because I agree. Like Dan, he's very articulate. I really admire his takes and points. And to me, John, more of this is kind of one of my least favorite parts of this job. This weird, I don't know, cult group that grows every year picks a movie to be mad at. I hate it. It's the worst thing about it that now every movie somehow has a political angle to it, and it is trying. You have to pick a side when they announce this movie and who's cast. All right, you with it or you against it, and then you're stuck to it. And I don't understand why they treat movies that way. Why they feel the need. Well, no, I do understand. It's clicks. They get the most idiotic, awful people in the world that love to just see other people fail, and they're clicking on that and they found it. I think half the time they don't even mean what they preach, if I'm being honest with you.
I agree. Yeah.
I do not. And I miss the times where we can get on, because there are people, I bet, that don't like Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey for actual valid reasons. They
Perfect, legitimate reasons. Absolutely.
And now those people who will speak out and say, I didn't like it, will be kind of bumped in with them, because we just don't have that middle ground to have discussion anymore. We don't have that of like, I didn't like the way the story flowed, or I felt like maybe she wasn't the right person to be cast because of the acting ability and not because of the color of their skin, right? I miss that in movie culture, and it makes me feel terrible for the young mind that like me one day clicked on a Collider or an AMC movie talk, your blog, and I was like, wow, look at his thoughts. There's somebody unfortunately clicking on those videos at a young age and now thinking this is the way I need to look and analyze movies. And that breaks my heart, because that's not the way you should be looking and analyzing movies. I love people like Dan and like you who bring this to the attention and keep fighting it on. It's just unfortunate. We're talking to brick walls. We're talking to people that'll never change their minds no matter what we say. And I just hate that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, especially because here's the thing. I'm going to take a big Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute classic sci-fi film, beloved by cinephiles. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of Blade Runner. And you know what? It doesn't make me feel any less secure in my opinion that I didn't like it, because a bunch of other people did. And it's so sad that the mental weakness in people that feel threatened when other people don't agree with their opinion about a movie, like about just the artistic merits of a movie, that you have to then make up all this nonsense and you have to make up all this bullshit to try to make yourself feel better about the fact that you don't like what's going on for reasons that have nothing to do with the movie. And again, I said it 10 times already. I'll say it an 11th. There is nothing wrong if you went in good faith and just watched the Odyssey, hoping to see a good movie, and it didn't work for you. I didn't like Blade Runner. I don't like the original Halloween. I wasn't almost everybody I know, Chris, liked the new He-Man movie. I didn't.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, everybody else on my show did too. I didn't. But guess what? I don't have to make up an excuse for why you liked it and I didn't. I just go, I'm glad you liked it. I wish I did too. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not trying to lump in people who make up these fake excuses with people who just legitimately didn't like the movie.
No, yeah.
Because that's totally fair. It's a really sad state of affairs. But again, you know, hate gets clicks. So
yeah, unfortunately.